Hi, everybody. Welcome to Auction on Air. Thanks for tuning in, or I guess no one's actually tuned in since the 90s. Thanks for coming in. Today, talking to a couple of friends of mine, guys that I met first time in person in New York City at the Legal Week show here recently. Guys, introduce yourselves.
Hey Dan, I'm Matt Rasmussen. I'm the CEO and founder here at ModeOne, based here in Overland Park, Kansas.
Yep. Hey Dan, Ryan Frye here, Chief Innovation Officer, and also in the Kansas City metro area, longtime forensics nerd.
So you can tell we're dealing with professional podcast guests here, because I didn't even have to say like, "Hey Matt, you go first" or anything like that. Y'all just kind of like jump right into it.
Yeah.
So for the people who are used to my very clumsy usual delivery, this is clearly going to be a much more polished version of the podcast. So, one, thanks for coming, and it was great meeting you in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for cover kind of the technical stuff first, that just for people who don't know, ModeOne, y'all's company, and us, Auction Forensics, have a little bit of a partnership going, and obviously most people kind of know what Auction Forensics does. We do digital forensics extraction analysis. One of you, why don't you just give the quick rundown of what ModeOne does for everybody?
Sure. Ryan and I and the rest of our partners, we built ModeOne to we've used a lot of the products like Oxygen and things like that in our prior lives to handle mobile data. And the one challenge we were having for some of our custodians, because Ryan and I are coming from more of the civil context, less of the law enforcement context, and we just kept getting pushed back that we were over collecting data just because the systems and the functions were kind of required to get full file system extractions and then take that back for analysis. And so we put our heads together and built a cloud framework that can target that mobile data off the device, and do that purely remotely, and do it at scale. And so that's what we built, and it's been really good for us just because, again, we're more on the civil side of things, not really wanting everything from the phone. And so that's what ModeOne does, kind of in a nutshell.
Awesome. And so the partnership with us is we essentially added a button, right, to our tool set, to a Road Explorer, where we can kind of take that output that y'all create when you do your extraction, and we can pull that in and parse that data. And we debuted that at the Legal Week show this year with you guys there. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your background. You said you come from the legal side. I guess I'll pick this time since you were the last one to talk, Matt. How about you go again? So how did you get here to be the guy sitting here today?
Sure. So I've been an e-discovery guy my whole career. Started on a copy machine in college, actually, and kind of rode the technology wave over the last 25 years. I was running litigation technology over at O'Melveny and Myers out of LA, and handled a pretty large M&A case, and needed to collect data. And I kept giving my custodians the same kind of speech. I need to collect it all. I'm not going to look at it all. I'm on your side. I'm not here as the opposing counsel trying to find all your secrets. And this was an entertainment executive. He just did not want to give up his phone. But that's what kind of brought me there. I mean, we could go into my background for forever, but I've seen it all from paper to scanning, where e-discovery actually really started, to, now we're into the, I think, kind of fourth gen of tech here. We started talking about this before the call about AI is now the big thing. So it's been kind of cool to see the evolution in the space here over the last 20 plus years.
So remember that. I want to bring up something about AI, but all right, Ryan, what you got? Tell me about Ryan. Educate.
Man, yeah, kind of like Matt, grew up in the space. Excuse me. Grew up in the space, fresh out of tech school, landed in an IT job, swapping backup tapes, reading JQL on green screens and AS400s. And so, I was able to evolve into litigation support. So again, kind of similar background to Matt with being on the civil side in the private sector. And that kind of led me into forensics, right? We started in data recovery. How can we recover deleted files? How can we find evidence of certain things, or disprove a contract date, that was signed allegedly on a certain date and time, and you find a a graphic in the header that was created by Photoshop 9 that didn't exist when that contract could have been signed. And so, cut my teeth there and earned certs, about every other year as I kind of grew into the space and worked on the service provider side. So got to run a large lab in the U.S. that led to 2 other labs across the globe, and just kind of kept earning my stripes to expert witness. So I could testify in court of all shapes and sizes, and just kind of keep elevating my skills and teaching those around me, sort of thing. So just literally I interested in anything technical, anything 1 and 0. We get into all shapes and sizes, from Wi-Fi routers to the nitty-gritty of phones and everything in between. I've done some crazy fun jobs. Matt and I always like to talk about our war stories a little bit, and so just anything kind of technical has kind of kept me interested over the years. And like you guys said, AI, isn't going to let that die. That how powerful we can make that to our advantage.
No matter how bad I want it to die, I don't think it's going to. I told y'all before the show, I staked out a position on that a while back, and I think I rolled and lost on that. We'll talk about that later. So one of the things I know that I've talked about it before here, and y'all both mentioned it, sort of. I came up, and a lot of people my age came up through digital forensics through law enforcement. But then, people get old, they retire, they go to new jobs. And it seems to me like one of the common paths is you either have people that kind of came up from copy machines all the way up into, big discovery suites, or you have people that come in law enforcement, got into digital forensics, and are trying to kind of make that switch. And like you said, Matt, initially, the digital forensics on the law enforcement side was always get everything. I started in dead box forensics. So, getting everything was a 25 gig hard drive or whatever. And it was like this massive mansion that could never possibly be filled. And for us as a company, we're starting with new products. We've started servicing more of the e-discovery side of the house. And the first thing you hear from everyone is exactly what you said. And the need y'all are trying to address is, whoa, I don't want you to get everything. There's 3 messages here that are important, right?
Yeah.
What do you think drives that? I mean, I have my ideas, and I'm not an attorney, but why is it? Is it just the people just not wanting to hand over their data? I mean, what do you think is driving that whole smaller data?
Sure. I mean, I can take first crack at this, and then Frye, I'd love to hear your take.
Look at this, man. This is like a tennis match with y'all. This is great.
Yeah. Honestly, I think my 2 things are technical literacy is a big one, right? Like if you think smartphones came out in 2008, right? And it was a combination of your iPod, your access to the internet, and your email, right? And that was new to everyone. Now we're almost 20 years since that kind of came out. So there's a lot more understanding about what's on your phone, what can be accessed, what can't be accessed. So I think there's a little bit of just more understanding generally across, and not even from technical folks, right? Like even from just low-level custodians that are in technical roles, they still understand that much better than we did in 2010. So I think that's probably the number one thing. The second is probably just how much we see in the news of what happens when there's too much data being taken, right? There was a story within the last 6 months about a police officer who was getting busted because he was looking through photos and putting those on the internet. There's Alex Jones had his whole phone produced to the other side when they were just looking for communications. And so there's tons of stuff. There's the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively stuff. There's the Brett Favre fiascos. And a lot of that stuff is coming down to what's on your phone, right? What can be discoverable. So I think that's the 2 things for me, just better technical understanding, and then seeing ramifications of overcollection or overproduction in the news.
Wow, by the way, good examples. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, exactly, Matt, what you're saying is key. What's in scope, right? most litigations, especially the civil ones and the investigations, there's a scope defined or acknowledged, or there's an understanding of what's needed. And dumping a whole hard drive, I mean, I haven't pulled a hard drive. I mean, I'm gonna be frank, I was an early adopter of live collections, and I haven't pulled a drive since like 2010. Like, unless I absolutely have to, for certain reason, right? But most of the time, there's the ability there to just say, well, ask the question, what are you looking for, instead of like we used to do, right? Smash and grab, take everything, sort through it later. Now there's an absolute time and place for that, right? The right kind of criminal matters, the right kind of investigations, IP thefts, there's definitely that time and place. But if you kind of, as an examiner or an analyst, if you ask the right questions, then you can, maybe do more with less, right? A targeted collection is a lot simpler, and it can scale a lot better. And I look like a hero if I knock 10 of them out in one day, where maybe I can only rip one hard drive, a day or two. So, I think there's definitely was a big shift there for a while.
One of the points you brought up, scope, and I think scope creep is one of those things that's kind of done a lot of people in. A lot of tools, you import, we extract a phone, you import data, and you like images. Oh, well, I've got all these image categorization things turned on. For law enforcement, it's, your scope is defined by a search warrant. This is what you can look for. This is where you can look. Okay, but if I have the image categorization turned on, and all these results start popping up, now I was looking for CSAM material, something like that, but also I happen to have the credit card button turned on, and so I start looking into a bunch of financials. I've exceeded the scope, and all of a sudden, I'm liable to have that door slammed in my face.
Mm-hmm.
I have thought for a long time, and I've made the argument, that we've kind of exceeded our scope so many times that maybe we've kind of lost that trust relationship. I always said forensic examiners are like a doctor, right? I don't go to the doctor and say, I'm hurting, but I'm not going to let you look anywhere. You're just going to have to figure out where. And that's kind of what that's the opposite side to what you're saying. It's like, look, man, people don't want to turn over all their data because of all the bad things that happen. But I mean, do you think maybe that scope creep by examiners might be part of the cause of that? I don't know. I think it's probably an issue. When I talk to people, when I've done some collections on the private side, I've been in a room where you've got 4 lawyers looking over your shoulder, like, what are you doing there? What are you doing there? And there's clearly a fear of people's private data getting out there, rather than just trusting that the professional sitting behind the wheel is going to do what he's supposed to. Thought on that?
Right, I'd love to hear your take here.
Well done, sir.
I mean, what do we talked about before, Matt? When if you over preserve data, and let's say it's like a SEC investigation, you end up producing everything. Now that's on a public record. What are some of those examples we've given in the past?
So that's where I was going to go with it. Is
okay.
For us. Okay, so like Dan, when you're talking about it, you're talking about like scope creep in a law enforcement context, and I understand those things as well. For us, we run into 2 problems, right? It's right. At the onset, we don't know what we may want, right? There's lots of data on the phone. What do we want, right? And then there's the ability to just like, maybe we over disclosed too much data, and there's a legal risk to that in a civil context, right? Like if like Ryan was saying, if we're looking for, if there was I'll give you a real example. At the old firm, I had a client who went through a DOJ second request. They're acquiring a second company. There's the government tax of an investigation to make sure that no one's fixing stock prices and stuff like that. They collected text messages, ran a priv screen against it, produced the rest. Well, that's a federal agency that then found evidence in those text messages of price fixing, not the merger. And now then that became a grand jury subpoena, right? Now there's collateral damage. There's millions of dollars being spent by a company because there wasn't enough kind of diligence in what we want, what's relevant, what needs to be produced to the other side. And so that's like a kind of a different type of scope creep where they introduced the scope creep, right? And I think kind of going back to my earlier comment about why we think we're getting so much more pushback from custodians, That is, if you're in that level of business, you know that your adjacent companies are under an SEC investigation, or they're getting hit by a grand jury subpoena, right? And so I think that kind of also adds to the, the public record of how these things are damaging them from a legal exposure, legal risk context. So I think that really does kind of impact some of the trust relationship, right? You hope that your forensic examiner, they've got the right credentials, but like, what's their background? How many times have they done this? Like, I mean, there's a lot of variables there that people still aren't super comfortable with.
Ryan, you mentioned, you were talking about getting in and doing like more targeted collections. Like I'd said, I came in when it was all dead box forensics and you're pulling a full year 01. But like you said, when was the last time you actually cracked a machine open and pulled a drive out? And it's been quite a while for me too. When I started working at Oxygen, we started building our Key Scout tool, which does kind of a targeted collection. It does, because of requests from some customers that are still maybe beholden to maybe some regulatory agencies, and DOJ gives them guidance and they still say, no, we got an EO1 on everything. So we put the EO1 button on there for them. But it was funny how much kickback I would get from people when I would say, hey, look, if you target this collection, if you build this profile and kind of only pull the stuff you need, like there's a lot of advantages to it. But how, again, guys that are, a little longer in the tooth still are like, well, that's weird. And, I don't know about live collection.
Yeah.
I remember the same thing when collecting mobile phones first became the thing, and people were like, well, how do you, where's the right blocker for the mobile phone? And you're like, okay, no, you're not, you're missing something here. I guess what I'm saying, as an industry, maybe we've been a little bit slow to change on it, but I do have the alternate for you. What do you tell people if they say, so let's say we did a collection of, you've got an Apple, an iPhone, and we do a targeted collection, and we really just want what would we pull into like one conversation, or maybe just lines out of a particular conversation? Is that kind of a typical ask y'all get, that sort of thing?
Yep.
Yeah. By app, by date, by conversation. Yeah. Any combination there. Yeah.
So what steps are people able to do though, if that came into question, if that's turned over and someone, and maybe the other half of the conversation says there should be more there. Is there steps that y'all would recommend for people to go back and try to kind of verify the provenance of the data that they got?
Yeah, I mean, I can start here, Matt, and let you jump into. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, what you've got to remember is that we're generally all on the same team, right? So if I was an examiner in house, that's going to go do a targeted collection or a full collection of a phone or computer, right? I'm being requested by maybe the attorney in the company, right, who's being managed by outside counsel, and I'm going to go down to my colleague's office and I'm going to run this request, right? So there's got to be a little bit of trust there, right? Because the attorneys,
see the trap?
Yeah,
see, that's just it there, right? You got to have trust, but not too much trust, right?
you got to walk the line for sure. But I mean, you got to trust that the attorney's giving you the right information you need, and if they're not, you got to ask the right questions. You can't be a kind of a push button examiner, analyst. You got to have a personality a little bit to be able to interface with these attorneys and translate. And then you got to go to your custodian, and they say they save all their documents in Word, then you're at a little bit of a different level of person you're dealing with. And so maybe you need to kind of rediscuss the 5 phone numbers and the text message conversations that were identified. But I mean, Matt, I'm not sure if you had any other perspectives.
Oh yeah, I mean, the thing I'm going to kind of touch on here is, Dan, you brought up kind of like, how do you validate that data? How do you make sure? So for us, for our typical use cases, there's kind of 2 separate workflows. I'm just going to use like a C-level collection where I want to collect Dan's phone on April 24th between texts and him and Ryan Frye to see if he approved a contract. Okay. A C-levels, phone, their text messages database is going to have a lot of sensitive material across a lot of different subject matters. And everyone agrees that we want that one thread. Okay. That's situation one. Situation two is Dan, the lead product developer, has to have his data put on legal hold for X, Y, or Z reasons.
Whatever action is coming up.
Right. And for us, we help kind of go through this conversation, but it's like, what is the legal requirement? What's the regulatory requirement for preservation here, right? So if it's a C level and we truly only need one thread and everyone's going to be okay that we only grabbed one thread, then we do that, right? And we can validate that. We are able to produce kind of a digital receipt of what we took from the phone. And this is what we grabbed. Even if we were going to be adding in the second context, even if we're adding application filtering, date filtering, participant filtering, from a legal hold context, we still preserve the entire SMS DB as an example so that we can validate nothing else was missed. This is how we got from A to B. We can validate that data. We can testify against that data. And it's very common for us, and this is not even a selling point. One of the things in forensics, and Dan, you know this pretty well, validation through other tools of your process is very important to validate the authenticity of what you're doing. And so that's what we talk about all the time. We'll say, hey, run a collection with ModeOne. If you guys are ever getting any pushback or you need to validate it through third-party tools, use your Oxygen license. Import what ModeOne collected from the phone. Now, that's not everything from the phone, but you can still validate the artifacts that we touched and took so that we can go back and defensively represent that we did what we said we would do. We were able to preserve this from a legal hold context and kind of check the boxes we want. So we kind of joke that we're always building a custom car every case that we're doing because it's always different variables and different time frames and stuff like that. But that's been a huge kind of important thing for us to make sure is built into our framework because it speaks to the whole forensics community in general.
Yeah, when needed, they can elect to include those original files like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just think back to just an example. Like I remember going and doing a collection on something, just some civil matter that came up, and I was, my number came up, and I remember doing the collection, going through, digging through, and looking at it, and realizing that they had just applied a backup to that phone the morning before, because they were trying to they were trying to time their way past the whatever event, and look. Most people aren't going to be able to. One, most people aren't going to be able to do it. Two, most people aren't going to be able to. It's very hard to cover something like that up. But sure. I just think my worry is that when we get into really, really targeted collections, after a while, there's just not enough of that peripheral information that we can go back and do a little fact checking on. So that's my fear. And again, that's probably more of a, like you said, the relationship in sort of the law enforcement side to that piece of evidence is going to be usually pretty different than what you're dealing with over on the civil side. And I think that's probably the thing to me that stood out the most. Like, oh, wait a minute. Both sides are standing here. We're all kind of talking about the same thing. And like you said, we're talking about preservation, and we're doing this kind of by agreement. But I just remember, again, I still come from the everybody's lying, everybody's hiding, and I want everything all the time so I can prove whatever. So
we see it a lot. We've had teams of all shapes and sizes, with law enforcement background too, and everyone has their own habits to break a little bit. And so it's good that you recognize that for sure, because it's not a bad one. You know what I mean? It's just a different perspective.
Well, and that made me think, Dan, that may be one of the, we were kind of talking about the differences between like law enforcement background folks and like e-discovery background folks. Ryan and I always have a saying of trust but verify. Right. Like, I know you're telling me the truth, and I'm going to make sure it's the truth. Versus what you just said, right? You kind of grew up in the environment of like someone's hiding something, right? And you need to find that. I think that's another big distinction of between that civil and law enforcement kind of context there.
Yeah, because sometimes Dan, is we're looking for the inverse, right? Like if you as an examiner are always focused on trying to find the evidence that proves the story, what about the examiner's job to find the evidence that disproves the story? sort of thing. And so sometimes we, at least my background experience in cases that I've worked as an expert witness, that's a lot of times what I get to do. Sure, right. You plugged in a USB drive. Sure, there's a link file. Do you understand your corporate policies? Like, can you even write to a USB drive if you plug it in? Right? Most of the Fortune 500 are locked down pretty significantly. If your drive's not encrypted, or you can read but you can't write to USB, they, all kinds of stuff like that, where just a quick artifact scan could tell you, yeah, there's smoke here, and your opinion is when there's smoke, there's fire. Great, but a lot of times our perspective has to be, well, did you ask any of the questions to learn about their environment? Is there environmental variables that could tell you what they're accused of isn't even possible? So it's always fun.
I'll just, not that I didn't know it was possible, but I'd never actually seen it done before. And so we had back last year, we actually had our auction user summit. In fact, and he later came on the podcast and we talked about it. But one of our guests said, "Hey, let me show you this cool thing I did," where he took an iTunes backup and he was able to go in with an editor and go in and start adding messages. Well, what he was doing is he was taking existing messages and then replacing them with his own text, and then you could spin it back out. And you think, yeah, again, hashing matters. A lot of things matter. Whether you can actually get that back on a phone to then present that as evidence to even be collected is a whole other thing. But our castle, all our castles are built on this idea that when we extract this evidence, it's the evidence from these devices, and it's pure. And when I saw that, I thought, boy, that just shakes the foundation a little bit. Like I said, I think, again, the number of people that could make that work, and then even get it on a device to then try to present the device. And look, I always said, like in law enforcement, we're not catching the ones that are really, really good at crime. You're getting the low hanging fruit most of the time. That guy, the guy that's going out there and altering that stuff, he's making a lot of money because he's getting away with a lot of stuff, and good for him, I guess.
Right.
Hopefully there's better examiners out there than me, and they found a way around all that.
Right.
So we start off. You mentioned AI earlier, and I'd said I'd staked a position on AI, and I'll since we were talking about it before we started talking live, for the literally dozens of listeners in the world. When AI first started coming around to to mobile devices and to computers, I'm talking maybe a couple of years ago, and you started going to the legal tech shows or ILTACon, and like the letters AI are on every single booth of the 6,000 booths. Everyone's got boom AI, and I'm like, this is Dan talking here. It's not a corporate position, but this is Dan talking. I was like, I don't know if that's going to be everything they think it is. They're like, oh, AI, it's like a 5-year-old child or whatever. I don't think this thing's going to pan out. My exact words, I think earlier, were, I think this is Betamax, and we're all going to be laughing about the big AI boom of the 2020, and that this is going away. I think I'm reversing that position, and I don't think it's going away. So it turns out I was wrong, or I think I might be wrong. Look, this may turn out 10 years from now, I could still have been proven right, but I think the odds are going down pretty quickly on that one. What do y'all, when you're walking around, one of these shows, and they're like, "Hey guys, AI," because I know they bring it up in context where maybe it doesn't even belong. What do you say to them? What's your thought on that? On any discovery?
Sure. So for us, we're digging deep on phones, right? So there is a little bit of, there's no Gen AI application yet that we're really wanting to apply. There's some analysis kind of stuff that we're talking about, like what emojis are on the phone and at what frequencies, and that kind of stuff, sentiment analysis. But none of that is new, right? To your point, this is 3, 4, 5-year-old AI tech, right? And I think that's one of the kind of cool things of why we're partnering with you guys on the analysis side is we get asked about AI all the time, right?
I know
what are you guys doing in that?
Right.
How are you guys integrating that into the tool? And, Is there application to it later? Absolutely. Are we building our own thing? No. Right? Like a kind of a cool analogy I heard is that with the creation of the automobile, with the dot-com boom, with crypto, and now with AI, it seems like what happens is there's this huge boom of the thousands of companies that do the thing. And over time, there's consolidation
And
acquisition, and people don't make it. And so, like, do we want to throw our hat in the ring and be like AI innovators? Hell no, right? Like, we'll wait to see who bouts it out, and then find ways to be bringing those applications internally. Like, we actually want to be able to use it, but
Yeah.
it is just such a dominant topic that has very little application. Very, like we were talking about trust, public trust, right? Attorneys are very shrewd in what they're believing, what they're not believing, and so there's some adoption, there's some working through the tech. So we're gonna wait and see how that all kind of comes out. I don't think it's quite beta max, but waiting to see who the victors are going to be.
Mm-hmm. And I know I'd like to see AI used to kind of help stitch experience together. So, for example, like anytime I brought in as an expert, I'm able to opine on what I think has happened or retell the story after examining certain devices and data sources because of my experience, both as a user and as an examiner, right? Like if I'm examining a Mac with iCloud and an iPhone, I'm all of those users, right? So I understand if I delete, if I move, if I rename, if I back up, if I sync or stop syncing. I know what happens because I'm both curious and I'm also an avid user of a lot of those sources. But junior examiners may not have that experience, or somebody on the team or on standby that does, and that's what forums and listservs are great for too. But that'd be great if AI augmented some of that, even not to further push button forensics, but to say, yeah, when you see this event log mixed with this link file, mixed with this registry key, this is a likelihood because you're looking at Windows, for example, or Windows 7. So I think just generally an AI assistant is a great idea. I'd love somebody to fold my laundry for me and run to the grocery store, or whatever. So I hope someday it's that cool. But I see utility for helping us in our jobs day to day for sure. And so we're going to keep a pulse on it, like Matt said.
For us, on the kind of on the we're y'all are on the collection side, we do on the collection side, and then we're doing the analysis. We've got image categorization's been around for a pretty good amount of time. It's a very low level, but we have it. Pretty much everyone in our space has some level of image categorization, things like that, and that seems to be what people are mostly comfortable with. But like Matt, you mentioned like sentiment analysis. Now, I would love to, for us to look into something like, I think there's a lot of value there. Here's all the text messages from this one person from on this device from the last 5 years. Give me a summary of how these two people feel about each other. Something like that. I like what you're saying, Ryan, about like, hey, here's a 10-minute window of time on a Tuesday, and I can see these, like you said, I can see link files being created, and I see all of a sudden user searches have been deleted, and then all of a sudden these like 5, 10, 20 items in this time period. It looks like this is happening. That's actually cool. I like that. That would be nice to, again, for people who either aren't as accustomed to looking at those things and kind of stringing together those likely events, or frankly, just sometimes you miss them. That's actually cool because we get asked about AI when we go to these shows. Just
Sure.
like I was saying, again, probably because of my bias that I staked out early on, I still kind of tend to tell people I don't know how much it's valuable on kind of our early side of it, the forensic side of it. I think when you get maybe to review a little bit further up the line, I think then maybe it's probably got a little bit more value. But for me, at our level of it, I see that I probably still want examiners making those decisions, making those calls, until they can start convincing me that AIs aren't, hallucinating things, and all of a sudden all that starts happening. I still think you still have to have like the guy who made the call so you can put him on the stand and ask him about it. But when you get to the review, because an iPhone can have a terabyte of data and a typical laptop could have 2, 3, 4 terabytes of data, like someone's got to start looking at it. Someone's going to have to get some help. I don't do y'all. I know y'all are doing phones. Are y'all messing right now with computer collection as well? If someone wanted to send y'all an easier one or plug in a machine, are y'all doing anything like that, or any plans to do anything like that?
We're not. We're really, like I said, we're kind of digging deep on the phone stuff. I mean, that keeps us. I mean, Ryan's got a roadmap list of 10 pages long, right? Like the amount of stuff that we can need to do or working towards on phones, that's where we really want to specialize, right? There's a lot of other tools out there. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with like analysis of this data, right? It's not really in our best interest to be spending time on building an analysis tool or a laptop tool or an email tool, because those have been around for much longer than we have. They're like, just transparently, if we wanted to compete with anybody that's out there, we'd have years of R&D, years of development just to compete with them in 2028 or something like that. It's just not worth it for us. So we're really kind of focusing on digging deep on phones. But one thing I was going to mention on the AI side of things there too is you brought up the hallucinations. Short message communication is a wildly different format, right? There's abbreviations. I could call him Frye. I'm not calling him Ryan. I could be using emojis to communicate. I'm using GIF files to communicate. And so
abbreviations, misspellings.
Oh yeah, misspellings,
slang. Right. There's so much to it.
Like Matt uses the word ducking a lot. You know what I mean? Like, so hallucinations would be a early problem. I also just think missed data would also be a problem, right? If I'm referring to RF or DD all the time and I'm not pulling the people we're talking to, or we're not understanding code, and those could just be totally avoided in the analysis or not brought into a cluster of, matter related materials, stuff like that. So that's another one of our kind of concerns.
I mean, I think about like a chat group I had with a fantasy football league, and like trying to feed that nonsense to an AI to see what it could come up with. I mean, it's almost unintelligible to any other human if I didn't kind of set some parameters going in as to what it was even being referred to.
Even the AI would be offended.
You see some of that. You see some of those same problems you were just talking about, Matt. Like in even just translation. When you're trying to do just regular language translation, and depending on how those models are trained, if you've been feeding it, Moby Dick for 10 years, and all of a sudden you're like, here's a 17-year-old, American girl trying to text a message to her father, and it's going to be like, well, I don't know what. I don't recognize this.
For sure.
I can't turn this into English, let alone into or out of any other different language. So
yeah. I always kind of joke that it hurts my soul that I know eventually we're going to have to do it. Is we're going to have to hire like an emoji analyst kind of role to understand what are all the things it could mean. That hurts me, but it's a reality. It's crazy.
And it's going to be like daylight savings, right? Okay, in 2024, what did these string of emojis mean? In 2028, they mean something entirely different. Like it's generational almost.
Dude, I feel so old. This is the oldest I've felt in a conversation in a long time. When you see like, wait a minute, you mean it means something different when you string these together in a particular order? I'm like, I'm out. I'm out.
To complicate it, a friend of mine has a really good slide that he uses specifically on the gun emoji, and he compares different OSs across devices and different years of evolution of that gun, because it's now a squirt gun, right?
Yeah,
on everyone.
It started off as like a legit Smith & Wesson 686, and now all of a sudden it's a squirt gun, right?
But there is a cross section there where on Android devices it still looks like a legitimate firearm, and on iOS it's a squirt gun. And there's even stuff like that where we have to start taking into account what did it look like on device A and what did it look on the receiving device B. It just again just kind of continues to complicate that analysis component of it.
Dude, I didn't realize, but you're right. Like emoji analysis is going to be like a legit thing, is or probably already is. So I have the benefit of sitting back now, and I'm not in there like mixing it up, doing the work every day. And you're right. Uh, wow. Like I said, I've never felt older than well, one other time. So when I first started in digital forensics, again, law enforcement side, started off in the chat groups. We would have these reverse operations where people were trying to meet adults trying to meet children on these different platforms, and so we would chat pretending to be juveniles, and I was much younger then, but still just trying to modulate my speech to that of like someone younger, and I remember just sitting there like trying to type it out, and I'm like, I feel like such an idiot, and try to have like this conversation as someone who at the time would have been 15 years younger than me or whatever, versus now, and you're talking about like, oh well, string a bunch of pictures together and try to turn that into a sentence like hieroglyphics. Man, I'm out, boys. I'm out. I'm too old for this.
Totally.
Brutal.
So what's just on the business stuff? Is there what's on the roadmap then for y'all? Y'all just I think you were probably pretty clear about it, Matt. You're like, hey, we want to stay in our lane. This is what we're doing. Is it anything new and exciting coming anytime soon, or just kind of doubling down on what you've been doing, stick with what works, or what are y'all looking at?
I think we've kind of hit our stride now. I mean, we're always looking for new features and new enhancements and more app support, stuff like that. When we started, we supported 5 apps in 22, and now we support, I think, 26 apps on iOS as an example, continuing to expand those kind of features and build out the product. But where we're really focused right now, you guys are a great example of this, is just integrations into the next step of the process, right? Like we talked about, we want to kind of be the hub on the wheel. We connect to those devices. We bring them into a central kind of one single pane of glass. And then you need analysis of that data, pushing it into Oxygen, right? It's going in for e-discovery workflows, pushing that through Reveal or Relativity and things like that. That's the biggest kind of client feedback we're getting. So that's really where we're kind of focusing, is trying to be as efficient in this process, protecting as much privacy as we can, kind of maintaining that corporate over retention, over collection components for their what their regulatory compliance kind of requirements are. That's where we're really kind of focusing. And then it's not very sexy, but it's InfoSec, right? Like you were talking about, the public trust is a huge component of that, and it's unfortunately not a cheap component of that. So like continuing to make sure that our certs are up to date. There's literally, I mean, you know this better than most, there's no shortage of certs that every client wants us to have. We literally found out that so we're 27,001 certified in ISO, but we found a 27701, right? And it's like a offshoot that's got the same kind of lift. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is really kind of build a bulletproof kind of set of armor around our process. Excellent. both from workflow and from data protection, things like that. So that's where we're really kind of digging deep in here, probably the next 12, 18 months.
Yeah, because that helps us continue to expand globally. Being in the cloud, we have all these other sets of rules to abide by in different geographies, and so that's big priority for us. And like Matt said, though, just like building the community, no locked type of formats that someone needs to learn, just to be compatible with us, right? How do we create kind of an open, cohesive kind of, data transfer model, so the short data can go quickly, can go at scale, where it needs to be, when it needs to be, and not lock anybody into a proprietary format sort of thing.
What do y'all view as maybe like collection challenges going forward? Like, so you're sitting here, and you're thinking, okay, well, we want to future proof what we're doing here. 2 years from now, we think that cell phones are going to have, blank. Is it, are we worried that they're going to change their, structure of, I'll tell you what, like a couple years ago, I did a presentation just kind of on the, what was the year 2000? You know, the kind of the joke about like this is how I see things going. And I said, hey, wireless charging. What do we do if wireless charging becomes so good that it's no longer the limiting factor, and we get to do away with the port on the bottom of the phone? You know, when things like that start becoming issues, if it ever, right? Just kind of looking forward to see what are, you know, what are we doing for us as a company, for Oxygen. Of course, that's an issue. We want to be able to make sure that we can get the data, but for you, same thing. Is there anything on the horizon that you're, you know, keeping your eye on? Or I mean, not to try to cut secrets out of you. If you've got like the Colonel's secret recipe or something, you don't want to give it up. I understand that, but just curious. Like, is there anything you'll look at and be like, you know, that could be a thing? Or
Sure. So I think there's three things that we kind of continually monitor. Application encryption, right? Is anybody could encrypt anything the way they want to. That will present a certain set of challenges. How do we interact with that? How do we stay ahead of that? So I think that's one thing we monitor. There's no restriction to, let's just use chat apps. It's not like there's a cap on how many third-party chat applications there can be. We could have Dollarhide chat, we could have Frye chat, we could have Rasmussen chat come out tomorrow, and one of those could really blow up in the market. And now we need to figure out how to interact with that data. Can we interact with that data? So it's kind of hard to have a crystal ball on that. But you did bring up a good point on the wireless charging. That has been something we keep our eye on. And it's one thing that kind of sets us apart a little bit from technology is because we're not doing full file system extractions or seizing everything or trying to find exploits. We're certified Apple developers and Android developers. And so what that means for us specifically is we have kind of a semi crystal ball of what's coming down the pike, right? A perfect example is iOS 16 is where they rolled out the unsends, the deletes, the edits, and they changed the formatting of their database structures. They changed where that data is being stored. They changed how the data is being encrypted. And so it's really nice because we get early access about 5-6 months early to then be, okay, here's the new set of problems.
This is what's coming, right?
Yeah. We have some amount of runway. We can interact with Apple or Android to talk about how do we talk in this way to make sure we stay ahead of that. But the market's the market, right? There's going to be changes. They don't need anyone else's permission to go change those things. So that's what we kind of try and do, just to try and be vigilant about what's out there. And it's really good because Ryan and Jason, our CIO, are really good at kind of monitoring things from the super technical lens, what are changing. So it's just being vigilant is our number one kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, Dan, when you said the wireless charging, you know, ports going away, you know, that's definitely something that can keep me up at night, you know. But to be fair, you know, we can still do stuff over Wi-Fi, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's just so much faster when you're plugged in and rolling. You know, it's exponentially quicker versus someone's crappy Wi-Fi connection. But yeah, I think that's a double-edged sword, though, as phone capacities get larger and you have so many kind of influencers slash, you know, constantly video recording type of people, and the quality and size and type of video that those phones can create now. I don't know if Apple's ever going to rip out that port and say, yeah, your 5 gig free iCloud account is now too small for your terabytes worth of photos. And that could be a brilliant business move, right? They force you to pay them for their iCloud storage. But so I think if you asked me, and you didn't ask me, but if you asked me where the future lands, I think there's going to be a line of economical phones that do get the port pulled. I think it's going to be kind of like that feature phone kind of thing that we see today, which is like some of them don't give you access to USB debugging. Some of them, the ports are charge only, you know, and chip off are the only solutions for those kind of, we can't say burner phone, but we mean burner phone kind of thing.
You know, that's not a bad idea. Like if you say, look, you know, if you wanted to monetize that market to say, look, I'll sell you a phone and it's going to be relatively inexpensive, but I'm going to, you know, tear your face off in the monthly charges to store all your data for you.
They did it on the Mac. They did it on the Mac, right?
Yeah, right, right. Like
they said,
the MacBook Air is based on that premise. That's interesting. So you're right. Now it's like, okay, so are we gonna? Is everything a JTAG or a chip off?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is one of those other places that I wonder if maybe AI doesn't eventually pop up on the forensic side, where maybe we have AI and the combination of quantum computing finally comes around to being able to where you can get back to like viable options for chip offs again because you can get past the encryption. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good way to look at it. Or AI is smart enough it can backdoor into your phone and take the data you need anyways without a cable. I don't know.
Yeah, see, that's the Skynet scenario.
Yeah,
and like and I've seen this movie. None of us come out of this alive.
That's why I got told yesterday. Did you know when you say please and thank you to like ChatGPT, for example, it costs them millions of dollars because it's just extra cycles that it has to run. And I'm like, yeah, but when it becomes alive, I'm going to be the polite user, not you.
You're going to appreciate that little bit of polite conformity that you taught it.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up
awesome.
in the Midwest. We have manners here,
Yeah, where are y'all? I think I know y'all. The company's based out of Kansas City.
Yeah, so now it was in Orange County. We moved it to Overland Park last year.
Overland Park, right?
Yeah, we don't have brick and mortar. We're all remote, but the whole executive team is here in KC. But we're spread out across every time zone. So.
And isn't tech great?
Yeah, it's awesome. Just as a business owner, I'm telling you, it's so nice not to have rent on the P&L. It's great.
And everyone's looking now, and if you're wondering if we all got together and grew beards together, we did. This was a plan.
We did.
Right. We planned this out like a year ago.
You made me jealous in New York, man. So trying to catch up.
And this is definitely the exact color it would be no matter what I washed it with. Well, guys, I appreciate your time today, man. It's fun talking to you. If you got any final words of wisdom for us before we sign off?
I mean, honestly, the thing we keep preaching is, in a civil context, ask more questions. Like, it's hardly ever that you need everything. I mean, like Ryan said, there's going to be lots of situations where you do need everything, right? But we see that as like a 10-15% use case in the civil market specifically. So just encouraging people to keep being educated, right? Find out what technologies are out there, how it can work, right? And then really, checking out the integration we have with Oxygen. Like I said, we're not doing a lot on the high-end analysis side, and so you guys have done a lot of work. It looks really awesome to have ModeOne data in there to get more details, more intel on the data. And so
that was fun, right?
Yeah, it was really fun. So I'd highly recommend people check that out.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, the only thing I would add is stay curious, to anybody listening. That's the best way to learn and best way to excel.